Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Today, we are gathered to review and discuss the importance of the disparities and distractions that are found today in online learning. What do we know about online learning? We know that it has dramatically increased. I know that we can connect that very closely to April 2020 when 48 states and 92% of schools were closed because of the threat of the spread of COVID 19. I found an edX report that noted that in 2021, I think this was written in 2020, it was projected that 110 million students would be participating in an online course of some kind, or one class per student. 10 years prior, that number was only 115,000. So, what now? What is it that we need to do to be a better teacher, better facilitator, better help our students become better online learners? We need to understand what it means to self-regulate and how to encourage our students to self-regulate. We need to understand attention span and how to facilitate and teach around that so that we create a best learning environment. And we need to understand the importance of motivation and how they all interconnect. One of the things that we're going to review first is attention span and what is the average attention span. There's a lot of information out there. One of the things I always think about are TED Talks, and hopefully you're aware of what a TED Talk is. But TED Talks are a maximum of 18 minutes. Why? The theory is you can give a serious presentation of content or idea, but also hold on a person's attention span based on research. Additional research tells us that student attention span, I'm going to get to this in a minute, is actually a little bit shorter, somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes. Now, um, when we talk about the goldfish, so there was an experiment that was done, a Microsoft report released that in 2015, Time magazine published an article based on a study that the average attention span of a person was 8 seconds. And I think they were connecting that also to like searching the web and how long a person was on a web page going to another. To put that into perspective, it was reported that a goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. We are unsure how the attention span of a goldfish is measured, which I found interesting. But nonetheless, we also, as educators, know that we can't lecture for only 8 second increments. So we have to kind of meet in the middle. Now, screen time in children. I really kind of wanted to look at that and kind of give a background of how attention span has shrunk over time. Research tells us that 2 to 4 years old, children that are 2 to 4 years old, are getting 2.5 hours of screen time a day. Increase that age to 5 to 8, 3 hours on average. What does this do? We know that at the time, up until 21, even, I think your brain is still developing, and making it harder for students to learn how to self-regulate, self-control, all of those things. And those are connected to attention span being lowered early in life. Another thing that's impacting attention span is sleep. 8 hours is important. There's something called sleep debt. It was coined by somebody. It's really probably not important for today, but sleep debt is acquired when students are only getting 6 hours of sleep a night, or people. The greater the sleep debt, the shorter your attention span. And I read somewhere too that said, you can't then get 12 hours the next night and hope that you're caught up. You need to get a consistent 8 hours a night. Now, the attention span. So, as I noted before, I found an author, Davis is the last name, from Tools in Teaching, that attention span really starts to diminish after 10 to 15 minutes, and that's important as educators. So, let's talk about note taking. Hartley and Davis found that note taking declines after 10 to 15 minutes within a lecture, and additional researchers saw a decline just after 10 minutes. Personal reflection. A study conducted on medical students found that attention was high in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the lecture, but started to decline after. And that was based on self-reporting. They stopped every 5 minutes, used a scale 1 to 9, and the students reported where they felt their attention was. And then how does attention span impact recall and retention? A gentleman by the name of Treneman found a correlation between the length of a lecture and the material retained during a podcast. It was found that those listening for only 15 minutes had retention rates of only 41%. Students listening to 40 minutes or more retained only 20%. There was additional studies. There was one found on medical students found that sitting in front had higher recall and retention than those that sat in the back. But again, all of these studies connect back to 10 to 15-minute attention span for students. Now, that doesn't mean lectures are going to be just 10 minutes, move on, but it is important to perhaps adjust around that time frame. Types of engagement. I was researching this. I thought this was interesting. So there's two types of engagement I found here: cognitive and affective. Cognitive engagement. So, as an educator, we want to be measuring both of these. The effort aimed at understanding complex material or learning um, challenging skills. So, mentally engaging. Effective engagement is one's emotional reaction to showing interest, curiosity, enjoyment on a task. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, how we can kind of measure that as educators. Now, it is a little difficult to see this map, and I apologize, but now we're going to look at disparities in online learning, starting with geography. So, and I found this so fascinating, I did not expect this, that the areas that had more remote learning were major cities, thus students of minority. Now, let's look at this map. Concentrated on the West Coast, right? We see Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, as well as East Coast over here, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Massachusetts, New York. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that those are larger cities. The threat of COVID spreading was greater in those areas. The counties with the smallest year-over-year decline in person visits tend to be concentrated in states across the Midwest and upper Midwest, such as, and you can see them up in this region here, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Iowa, Kansas, and elsewhere. Cities with larger population, denser populations, and this is the key point here, which tend to have more racial and ethnic diversity, are perhaps at a greater risk of transmitting COVID-19 than smaller rural areas that tend to be more white. Then I also have a chart over here for you. If you look closely, hopefully you'll get a chance to go back and look at this, but it identifies rural, town, suburb, and city by race percentage. And the reason I did this is I wanted to connect the two. Not surprisingly, then, students of color are also likely to live in city school districts, which are more likely to be online during their white counterparts, as compared to, rather. Now, here I took a look at percentage of distance learning by race and ethnicity, and then I looked at some reopening by race and ethnicity, school districts reopening. So this first graph here presents trends by race and ethnicity, as I said. And again, if you zoom in, you can see what each color represents. Those students from each of the observed racial ethnic categories face similar rates of distance learning in April. The disparities widened throughout autumn. Okay, so yeah, here we are all doing this together, and then it starts to separate. In October, 35% of white students were exposed to distance learning compared to 51% of Black students, 60% of Hispanic, and almost 65% of Asian. And then graph 2, students in urban school districts. So this is the reopening phase where, we would be kind of, I guess, in this region here. Students in urban areas and large school districts are more likely to still be remote learning. Even within the same school district, Black and Hispanic students were more likely than white students to have started the school year remotely. I also found I wanted to talk today about something known as the digital divide, and it so reminded me of like the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, and now we are adding another one, the digital divide, and what's happening. So we're looking at access to devices by ethnicity and internet or no internet by race and ethnicity. Over here in graph 1, displays access to devices for online learning and internet by race and ethnicity from May of 2020 to October of 2020. We know our school districts work tirelessly to provide computers hotspots. Black and Hispanic communities remained in higher need compared to white. Black and Hispanic households are still 3 to 4% points more likely than white households to have reliable access to these devices, and 3 to 6% less likely to have reliable internet access. The second graph over here pretty much shows the same thing. You can take time to look at it, but Black and Hispanic students continue to be more likely to remain remote and are less likely to have access to those prerequisites, which is a real problem when we're looking at online learning. Pulled a quote that I thought was very important in recapping what you just looked at. It's school closures and distance learning have exacerbated these gaps, especially from students of color and students from lower income communities. Now we're going to take a minute to look at attention and online learning and factors and distractions to being an effective online learner. First, we must look at arousal, a person's activity and stimulation of their cerebral cortex. It can be measured through heart rate. One study conducted by Bly measured heart rate every 5 seconds. They found that heart rate declined by the end of a lecture. So, and interesting enough, the same thing happened during a discussion, and we're going to connect arousal to attention. And then we have down here, I added this because I thought it was nice to kind of see how they all blend together. But level of attention. When studying the effect the level of attention has on motivation, one must consider self regulation. What does it mean? A study conducted by Barton et al. Looked at the effect of social media engagement on attention and motivation of students, found that self regulation, so your ability to say, no, I'm not going to do that, has a direct correlation to attention and motivation. We're going to get into that in the next slide, but I cannot stress that enough. So, what are our distractions to our students? Cell phone. Many leave a cell phone near them while learning. We're going to encourage them to not do that. I'm going to get into that too in the next slide. Schedule. No schedule, rather. So, learning when you want, eating when you want, socializing when you want, not a real structured schedule like we had when our students were in person or when they chose to be in a traditional learning setting. House distractions, television, family members, pets, siblings, all of those things. Outside distractions, outside noises, neighbors, cars, dogs. Clothing. Many in my research found many students wear pajamas, many kids wear pajamas, and we associate pajamas with relaxation or sleeping. Bed. Many students are in their own room learning while laying down on their bed, hanging out in their bedroom. And again, we associate bed with sleep. Kitchen. We associate kitchen with eating. Might get hungry, snack more often. Music. There's a lot of research out there that suggests that music does not help you learn. I'm going to get into that, I think, by the end of this slide, but if I don't have time, there's really a lot of research that talks about music and multitasking and what's happening. I have a lot of students that say, oh, no, music helps me focus. And there's a lot of research out there that says, no, it does not. There's a I forget the term, but where you're switching back and forth. And then sleep. And I talked about sleep in the last slide, so I'm not going to cover that again for the sake of time. So, challenges and suggestions. There's a lot on this slide, and I'm sorry, but suggestions for our learners. Based on all the things that we've seen, what can we suggest to them? We can suggest creating a schedule, providing a quiet place with no distractions. And I know not everybody can afford a desk, or not every family can afford a desk, but perhaps finding a space where you can sit upright and have a space that is designed just for your learning time. Eating time. Structure a time to eat before and after an assignment. Reward yourself. Set something where when you finish this, I can reward myself. Sleep. Like I told you before, 8 hours is recommended. It is much easier. Research supports this to engage in online learning when you've had adequate sleep. So, what can we suggest to teachers? 15-minute increments. Traditional lectures are 50 minutes, but research suggests that that is far too long. 15-minute increments is a good approach to disseminating information. Written cues. Breaks. I forgot that part. Taking breaks allows people to gain more energy. We don't take enough meaningful breaks. Encourage students to find a good break point. There's something known as I'm going to not pronounce this correctly, but Pomodoro technique. We set a timer for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. 25 minutes, 5-minute break. And you can kind of adjust that 25-minute to what works best for you. Written cues. Lectures that contain written cues rather than just spoken ones increase retention rates. Two-way communication. Encouraging a collaboration between the student and each other or yourself. Interesting graphics, making that catch the reader's attention. Speech and cadence and style. So, sounding more emotional, more interesting, increases attention and motivation. Respect and rules. I really like this one because I think this is very important, just like you would in a regular classroom. Students suggest, and studies have shown, that students are more engaged when they feel respected and valued. They want to feel a sense of belonging. What are challenges? We have challenge with motivation. The more a student is motivated, the higher the level of attention. A study at the University of Malaysia found that students with high motivation can adapt more easily to online learning. Increased motivation leads to increased attention, like I had said in that last one with the triangles. Self regulation is key in online learning. They are not monitored, right? So when students are learning at home, they're not monitored. So research tells us that students with high levels of self-regulation adapt to online learning. And then, kind of to go back to attention and engagement, a study done by Kelleher in 1987 notes that attention is critical in increasing motivation. Teachers look for attention from students to ensure they're listening and learning, and we have to adapt to that with an online setting. So, moving forward, strategies moving forward that I can bring to you today based on all of the other research and slides and information that we've gathered on disparities and what we have found from studying with the dramatic increase in online learning. Know your technology, right? We talked about that last week. Know your management system and make sure it's working for your students. Create and maintain a strong presence as an educator. Foster collaboration and engagement. Establish rules that develop a sense of learners. Request feedback from your students. Incorporate variety to your lessons. Communicate with families. That one is huge. Communicate with families. Positive reinforcement. Make sure your due dates are very clear and remain consistent. And I believe that is all for today. Thank you.